All right, good morning. Welcome to Mornings with Marit, and I have Steve McKee with me today. Steve, thanks so much for joining us this morning.
Thanks for having me. It's fun.
Yeah, well, I'm sitting here in Austin. It's a rainy, drizzly day. You're in Albuquerque. How's it over there?
It's like perfect blue sky, sunny, and 60-something degrees. Sorry.
That's all right. I like rainy days. Good. Well, thanks for joining us. I know we've been friends for a very long time, obviously back in my Albuquerque days. And
Yes.
I had you speak with us a couple times there, and now we've introduced you to Texas. I know you were at Joe Vincent with us in January, and you did a keynote for us on the disruption cycle. And certainly today, that's a very serious conversation. We've certainly been disrupted in the last month or two with COVID-19. And so we want to make sure that we continue those conversations. And I appreciate you joining us today to talk about what businesses should really be thinking about right now and give some feedback to our agents. And then we'll continue some more series. And obviously you'll be with us at InsureCon and other Joe Vincent events as well. So I'm going to turn this over to you, and we'll talk a little bit throughout, and I appreciate your time.
Okay, thanks, Marit. We're all going through something right now that none of us have ever been through before, and it occurred to me last time I heard Marit this whole concept of the race being won on the turns, and so that's what we want to talk about today. I will confess, if any of you are big NASCAR fans, you might catch me saying something wrong. I have been to races and I enjoy it. I'm not an expert, but the metaphor really seems to be a good one, and that's why we wanted to talk about today why the race is won on the turns. And so we just have a number of points that I'd like to take you through and to give you some things to think about. And the first one is sort of a setup to this whole concept of why the race is won on the turns, and it's because straightaways are easy. Now, if you've driven 180 miles per hour, straightaways are not easy. I've never have. I'm sure I'd probably run the car into the wall. But relatively speaking, straightaways are easy. And the metaphor, is true in business, that business isn't easy, of course, but relative to the turns, it is easier to accelerate. It's easier to navigate. It's easier to keep the machine in control. Newton told us that an object going straight will keep going straight unless something makes it change direction. So the action is usually more in the turns. And while straightaways are fun, and I'm talking about, like when business is good and life is good and the economy is growing, it is fun because you get to drive the car fast. Maybe you get to glance over at the crowd or at the flagpoles, zipping by or whatever. And that's a good time. It's in the turn where there's more variables. It's easier to make mistakes. It's where the car is more difficult to drive simply from a physical force standpoint. And so that's why the metaphor is really good. And as I was beginning to do a little, homework on turns versus straightaways, there were three words that came up that are necessary in the turn. The first one is force. And what's so interesting is if you think about the physical aspect of a race car, it needs force to push it sideways. And that force is centripetal force, so like if you have a ball on a string and you swing it around, the tension in the string provides the centripetal force. And so you need that force to make a car move sideways, which leads to the second F, which is friction, which again is really fascinating. On a racetrack, the friction is caused by the tires on the road, that the tires stick to the road, and that's the friction that allows the car to turn. And I just think that that's really interesting because we're all experiencing a lot of friction these days. And friction, it's hot, friction can hurt, and it's not fun, but that's where you can make the difference. And the third F in that construct is focus. That the race is won in turns because that's where mistakes are made. That's where opportunities are seized, and you really have to be focused when your car's going through the turn. So yes, you can drive faster on the straightaway, you can worry less on the straightaway, but when you're navigating a difficult turn, like we all are, it should at least invigorate us. And so that's what we hope to talk about a little bit today. So the first thing is you're headed into a turn, which we're all maybe a little bit past, but I think it's a good thing to point out, is you better check your gear. And what I mean by that is, friction is necessary during a turn, and you want to go into the turn with the highest amount of speed you can. But in order to do that, you have to have a lot of confidence that you're well equipped and that you're safe. And so, before each race, the drivers will get a safety briefing. They're taught about the car's fire suppression system and how to remove the steering wheel if you run into the wall. They put on their burn resistant suit and their helmet and do all their safety checks. And then, of course, they actually have to climb through the window and get secured with a 5-point harness and strap their safety net into place. It's like, okay, we're committed here. And so the point here really that I'm trying to make is that some drivers are better suited than others to race hard. Or maybe it would be better said, in some situations, you are able to race hard better, more so than in others. So, for example, my company, we're a professional services firm. We manage ourselves very conservatively from a fiscal standpoint. And so that gives us more options during a time like this. We are less likely to be able to have to furlough or lay off staff. We're more able to invest in change. So you could sort of argue that we've got a lot of safety gear on at this place. If you don't have all your gear, if this virus thing caught you at a bad time, you may just have to adjust your expectations. You may not, some of you may be looking to win the race, meaning you can really make a move here, competitively speaking. Others, it may be more about just finishing the race well. And for some of us, it may be about just finishing the race, period. We don't know how long it's going to last. We don't know how much gas we have, but we need to make sure that we're gathering all the information. And so the main point here is to do what's right for your company and your staff in your situation. You can be optimistic, and we all should be, but you need to be realistic. And one of the ways to do that is to seek out news from a variety of sources, not just the ones you consider your go-tos. Because as you probably are seeing, there's a real split in opinion as to whether this thing is going to be a disaster for 18 months or we can all go back to work today. One thing I will say, there's a gentleman named Howard Marks, who's one of Warren Buffett's favorite money managers, and he sends out a newsletter with, those great insights in it. He said this line, which I thought was great. These days, everyone has the same data regarding the present and the same ignorance regarding the future. And it's absolutely true. He pointed out that this is the greatest pandemic in 100 years. It's the greatest economic contraction in 80 years, the greatest decline in oil prices ever, and the greatest central bank government intervention ever. So we're all familiar with the term past performance is no guarantee of future results, but we're even out of the territory of past performance here. So we really need to check our gear. We really need to continually evaluate what we are capable of as we head into this turn.
Steve,
then there's, oh yes.
Steve, something that occurs to me as you were talking about that, and obviously you're going to talk about the crew next, which I guess is a good segue here, but when you talk about being well equipped and safe, I think that's one of the big things and themes we've been trying to communicate with our clients and our members is that's a really key piece for your staff. There's not a lot of things that they can control right now, as you just mentioned, that, the economy, the unknown of the virus, but what we can control is how our employees feel every day about the safety of their work and the stability of the organization. And so I think that's a really key piece that we take the time. I think the insurance industry, that's going to be a bit of a lag before we really feel it. Of course, this week was huge with the oil crashing. In fact, I have one of my board members was in one of my management programs this week, and he had to drop off in the middle of it simply because, they have a huge amount of oil as part of their, portfolio. And so they're totally in crisis right now. And so then there's this unknown, but I think what we can do is try as hard as we can. Obviously people have submitted and gotten funds from the payroll protection plan and other things, making sure you communicate to your staff what you're doing to ensure that safety, I think is a really key thing that we can do right now in one place of people's lives.
Totally, and I think this is a huge opportunity. The metaphor of the pit crew is good because, look at these guys. they have to move fast. They all have to know their job. They all have to do the right thing at the right time in the right way when the pressure is highest. And when they're uncomfortable, look at what those guys are wearing. It's not pleasant to be wearing all that gear on a hot summer day on a hot track working with a hot car. And one of the things that I mentioned this at Joe Vincent was, this goes back to Wengrow Stalls and the original research that the company did, where the internal dynamics that tend to tug at companies, briefly they are a lack of alignment, a loss of focus, a loss of nerve, and inconsistency. And we can talk a little bit more about those. But the main one I would focus on at this point is the question of alignment. When a company is hit with a tectonic event, and we define that as, like an earthquake, an earth-shaking kind of event, this certainly qualifies as one. Those internal dynamics tend to rise up. It's really crazy because I've always used the metaphor of health for this, that we believe that the destructive internal dynamics are present in all companies at all times. But when things are going well, it's kind of like your corporate immune system is keeping them tamped down. When you're hit with an event like we're hit with, the corporate immune system, just like our physical immune systems, can get depressed. And when it gets depressed, it allows those things to rise up and they can make the organism sick, if you will. So it is a good metaphor here that, the old biblical adage is know well the condition of your flocks. Communicate. Recognize that everybody's dealing with different stuff. Everybody's dealing with stuff at home. Everybody's routine has been upended. Different people have different circumstances. And so now is really the time to take care of your crew, to go over and above and taking care of your crew if you want them to take care of you. But also seeing, and we'll talk about this in a moment, that who your crew really is. And this is an opportunity to, if somebody's going to slow you down or miss a bolt on a tire, you might want to know that, and you might want to do something about it. So work your crew. If you do nothing else during this time, I would recommend that you do that. Make sure that you have a healthy, strong crew. Then, as we're entering the turn, as we've checked our gear, we're working our crew, there's this whole concept of knowing your place going in. Are you in first place? Are you the market leader? Are you trying to protect your share? Are you the guy in the back? Are you the upstart who's got nothing to lose? And you might want to do something more aggressive during this. Are you the one in second place, right on the shoulder, where you might be able to make a move, but you want to be careful about it? I noticed something, Coca-Cola just announced that their global sales volume is down by about 25%, because a lot of it comes from restaurants and events, of course, that are all shut down. And so they've decided to cut their ad spending. They are the market leader in their categories, and they've just decided that they're going to not take this turn aggressively. Obviously, if something changes, that'll change, but they're going to just try to maintain their lead without putting too much stress on their car. Contrast that to Procter & Gamble, who is like, what an opportunity here. They've got all these packaged goods brands that have been in decline because, a variety of reasons. And now all we can do is go to the supermarket and eat at home. So all of their packaged goods products, shampoo, scissors, all that stuff is going through the roof. And so they're doubling down on it. So they're going to be a little more aggressive. And so that's a great example of choosing your line. My favorite strategy professor, a guy named Richard Rumelt, they call him the strategist. He's written some great books. Highly recommend him. He said this. He said, a structural break is the very best time to be a strategist, for at the moment of change, old sources of competitive advantage weaken and new sources appear. And that's kind of this idea of when you're headed into the turn, the playing field can shift. He also said this, though. He said the most important element of a strategy is a coherent viewpoint about the forces at work, not a plan. So the best drivers understand, the state of their tires, the heat of the track. They understand they're taking in all the dynamics as they begin to make their plans and looking for an opportunity to do something. So obviously a race is a dynamic thing, just like we're in a dynamic moment right now. Things could change in the middle of the curve, but as we're heading into this, it's important that you at least have some preconceptions about what you hope to accomplish here, what your objectives are, through the pandemic. And that sounds weird because it's like, well, we just want to stay alive. No, it could be a real moment of opportunity here for you.
Yeah, Steve, one of the things that occurs to me in this as you're talking is, this is a good time to be really communicating with your carriers as independent agents and talking strategy long term. I'm not sure how often people right now in this are actually starting to build long-term strategy. You actually may be able to position yourself differently with a carrier. Obviously, communication is going to be key. And I think you can bring real value to your clients as well. Go look at your top, 10% of your clients and make sure that you are visiting with them about these kinds of things and what is their strategy, and can you be of support in that, and be, a true trusted advisor in that regard. So, talking to your staff, your carriers, your clients, your community, I think this is a time that people can really be helpful in a unique way and start to strategize differently about how they're going to be selling their products and or what kind of products and services will be needed.
Yes, and so we move from strategy to opportunity. Beware the bump. This could also be titled Be the Bump. There is this thing in NASCAR racing called the bump and run, which is kind of illegal, but the judges overlook it if it's done in a subtle, minor way. Basically what it is when you're in second place or you're trying to pass somebody, you get right up on the guy in front of you's bumper and you give it a little nudge, which screws up his aerodynamics and typically causes him to fly up the track, which gives you the opportunity to pass by. It happens actually all the time. It's really remarkable. There's lots of stories of races that are won with a well-timed, well-played bump. Sometimes it results in a fiery crash, which is why it's controversial, but it is part of the sport. It's also part of the sport of business. Here's Netflix growing fast, the world's #1 network, and along comes Disney Plus, who they really weren't expecting. And Disney Plus says, oh, by the way, we're going to undercut your subscription price rather significantly as we launch. And so Disney Plus has given Netflix a huge bump. Of course, the dynamics change because everybody's watching everything now. Or you take Amazon, that is shoveling money to Federal Express to deliver its packages, and then says, yeah, we're going to do it ourselves, throwing FedEx into total, disarray. I'm finding it really interesting now watching DoorDash and Uber Eats, who, God bless them, they're being very magnanimous today. Boy, are they gaining immense consumer trial, and they're gaining market power during the quarantine because they're training us all to use them. And it's going to be really interesting to see how they use that afterwards. So a lot of ways to get bumped. Somebody may try to underprice you or take a little license in prospecting your clients, or maybe even just as you cut back, they're going to get more aggressive. But the point here is you always have to be looking around as well and be prepared for the bump. It might come now. It might come later. It might come when you least expect it. And when I said, you might want to be the bump, my next door neighbor is actually a star salesman for a food service company, and he's been furloughed. And in his furlough, he's being recruited aggressively by one of their competitors, which he's kind of enjoying. But it does sort of underscore again, if you want to be aggressive, now might be the time to recruit that all-star from your competitor or even from just another business. It might be the time to build your staff. Maybe give your little competitor a bump if they've furloughed somebody or laid somebody off. Is it fair game? It's up to you. It's certainly nothing illegal about it. It just depends on how aggressive you want to be. But certainly watch out for the people being aggressive against you.
Right. And right now, I don't know how much in this industry at this point people are being furloughed, but it potentially could happen. I think there is going to be a wave that's going to impact us as businesses shrink and or go out of business with their premiums, and then what that direct correlation is going to have to our agents. But if you look around, there is going to be talent out there that I think people should be looking for. And I think the strongest companies with the right brand and the agencies are going to be able to bring them on because this is generally a fairly strong industry that weathers the storms fairly well. So it's a good time to tell the story about this industry right now as well.
Choose your line. So the line is the route that a driver follows to take the corner in the fastest way. And so you can see here, there's 3 cars lining up, and they're all taking a bit of a different line based on their place in it. And so to get the line correct, it's really important that you turn the wheel, just the right amount at just the right point. If you turn too late, you'll miss the apex, which we'll talk about in a minute, and too soon, and you're going to have to tighten your line, and it's going to throw you off. So I understand that there is rarely a perfect line through any corner, because in racing, it depends on not only the shape of the track and the speed of the car, but the humidity in the air and the quality of the tires and all that sort of stuff. And so you really want to be careful about which line you take. What is your line during the quarantine? Are you going to go high and pick up momentum on the downside, which is one way of doing it? I think that's what Coca-Cola's strategy is. It's kind of save their chips when they see things come back to double down. Or you want to go low and cut the corner. You want to sit back and wait for somebody to make a mistake. You want to be aggressive and force some change or bump somebody. There's a lot of opportunities here, but one of the things that I would like to encourage you is there are a lot of opportunities here. Now, as independent agents, you are the fabric of your community. You are rooted and grounded in it, and this is such an opportunity to authentically be your brand out there, and there's a bunch of different ways to do it. You could be a thought leader for your clients and your community about the pandemic, about how to reopen or when to reopen or how to be careful as we reopen the economy. I mean, you are respected business people. You could do that. Or you could take a different line of, like empathy, like doing grocery delivery, or I don't know if premium forgiveness is a thing. I saw an interview with the CEO of Landry's Restaurants based in Houston, and he actually said, this sounds kind of weird, he laid people off fast because he said the first in line for unemployment are going to be the best off. So, I mean, that's kind of interesting. I think the circumstances are different in our businesses, but he was thinking in terms of his staff and how to help them the most, knowing that he was going to have to lay them off anyway. You could take a line of encouragement or humor or entertaining clients in the proper way. You could focus on new product or service development behind the scenes, financial planning services or succession planning services or what have you. I noticed that Kraft actually introduced Miracle Whip during the Depression in 1933. Apple launched the iPhone in 2007. I don't think they did it intentionally in the recession, but it came out right at the beginning of the Great Recession, and it changed the world. Or even your line could be staying behind the scenes or staying kind of quiet publicly, but focusing on improving your technology or your operations or your staff. The point here is the curve doesn't happen to you. You enter the curve. And so be very intentional about how you want to use it. Next, we have to time your braking. Okay, this is important. Whenever you head into a turn, you need to, in a race car, you need to slow down, from 150 to 80 miles an hour or something. You don't want to lock the tires. You don't want to spin out. You don't want to let somebody pass you. And so you want to tap the brakes. You don't want to ride the brakes. And this is really important in business as well. This gets back to our internal dynamics that I mentioned, and one of them being a loss of nerve. We've all had to tap the brakes. I'd be shocked if you didn't look for some ways to be more efficient or cut back on your spending initially. But I'm always fond of saying you can cut your way to survival, but not to success. And I like to quote Benjamin Graham, he's the father of value investing. He said, the more dubious a company's prospects, the more anxious management is to retain all the cash it can in the business. So that's kind of what we're facing right now. We've got to retain some cash. But you can flip that statement around, and it's equally true that the more anxious management is to retain all the cash it can in the business, the more dubious the company's prospects. So we are in a time of great uncertainty. We all want to, do the best we can to make sure that our organizations do well. And uncertainty is a part of business. But if you break all the way through it, you're going to lose. work your gears. Brakes are not the only things that can help you speed up and slow down in a turn. Sometimes you need to downshift, and sometimes you need to upshift, and sometimes you need to shift up and down through the course of a turn. I found it really interesting that Burger King, when the pandemic hit, they decided to start offering 2 free kids meals for any customer who ordered an adult meal in the drive-thru. And their theory was, well, families are struggling to feed their kids because a lot of them get fed at school. So we're just going to fill that gap. Wonderful shift in Burger King's strategy without tapping the brakes to make the company more appealing to somebody. So that's important as a way of broadening your thinking. It's not just about sales today, it's about setting you up for tomorrow. All the way through historical recessions, this has been the case where companies have tapped their brakes, worked their gears up and down from post losing to Kellogg's during the Great Recession and never catching back up to the Great Recession when Hyundai made huge gains in market share because they guaranteed to take back the cars from owners who lost their jobs. So lots of different ways to shift gears. You know, I mentioned Coke earlier. A lot of their marketing is tied to events. And so they're downshifting now because events are being canceled. And when events start getting rescheduled, they're going to upshift once again. And that's a really smart strategy for them. So it's not just about slowing down and speeding up. It's about tactically shifting gears in the midst of a pandemic like this to make things work for you.
Yeah, Steve, I think one of the things that we can talk about too is, you know, we're changing the way that we communicate with our clients right now. And there may be ways for improvements in the long run that you keep at it. So learning from our clients, what do they like about this transition? Because there is going to be opportunities for new ways to serve and communicate and frankly use electronics and technology in a different way that we may have resisted in the past. I've got a massive thunderstorm going here, so if you hear loud thunder and lightning, I'm going to try and keep muting. I actually jumped and screamed a bit, but luckily I was on mute when it happened.
There's no question that this is going to change us permanently. It's not going to change everything about us permanently. I don't subscribe to that, but it is going to change things, and we need to be flexible in doing that. And along those lines, you got to watch for oil, right? Don't slip up. Something is going to happen that is unexpected. I talked at the Joe Vincent conference about how your brand is unlike any other asset you have because it can continually appreciate, unlike other assets which depreciate. And I made the point, which I'm always underscoring, is it can always appreciate. It doesn't mean it does always appreciate. And a lot of brands are going to screw up. There's something on Twitter the other day I saw about celebrities with their tone-deaf tweets, right? Like complaining about being quarantined in their mansions and those sorts of things. It's easy to make a mistake when the events on the ground are changing really quickly. I noticed KFC, this is kind of obvious, but they kind of dialed back their slogan because if you all recall, their famous slogan is finger licking good. And it's, you know, it's like, hey, wash your hands. It's not such a great thing to say right now. So that's really smart. But, you know, tourism companies pulled their emails that are touting travel planning, and restaurants shifted first to messaging about social distancing. We want to do it. But at the same time, everybody rushed an email out with the subject line that had COVID-19 in it. And if I get another email that says COVID-19, I'm going to go nuts because we all feel like we have to be out there, you know, saying something. And maybe we do, and maybe we don't. Just yesterday, this is an oil skid. I got an email from a business colleague who I know reasonably well. And it said this, and I quote, "Hi there. I hope you and your family are doing well during this crazy time. If I can do anything for you, please let me know. Look forward to seeing you in person soon, Joe." I checked the to line, and sure enough, it was to a listserv. He didn't even use my name. And I'm like, Joe, what are you doing? You know, it actually worked against him because I'm like, you spent all of 60 seconds reaching out to all of your customer base with a lame, you know, subject email. And so Please don't tell me you all send pre-printed holiday or birthday cards. That's a different topic, but please don't. But we want to be really careful during this time and, not advertise our aspirations, not over-communicate, not make people hear from us when they don't want to hear from us, and not saying something stupid. So we just want to be careful. And one thing that we need to think about, an oil patch that we know is coming, is what's going to happen when we go back to work. What's going to happen in your office with someone with allergies starts coughing, or somebody sneezes without covering their face, or what's going to happen when you go see a client and they're wearing masks and you're not, or you're wearing masks and they're not. What are going to be the new office protocols? Are members of your staff who are formerly friends, who have different views of the pandemic, going to be at odds with one another? What happens when we get a vaccine and someone in your office refuses to take it? Some of these are oil patches we can anticipate, and you might want to be thinking about those ahead of time. But, always think twice. What's the old saying? Measure twice, cut once. You especially want to do that during this time.
Yeah, Steve, I actually want to just jump in here because as an association, we're struggling right now with, how much do you communicate? There's information coming from all over the place. And so I think at the beginning of this, there's a ton of information we could shoot out to folks. And then we kind of got into this new normal. And so we try and make sure there's a resource page available and really only put out what's critical, that's maybe even just fairly unique, as opposed to just repeating what's out there. And of course, we also have a InsureCon, as you know, coming up in June, and trying to figure out what we're actually going to do with it, waiting for, what the government's plan is for re-entry and reopening the economy. Will the hotels be prepared for it? Will we end up having to provide some sort of a virtual event instead? So those are real things that, even us as an association are dealing with day in and day out right now. And the unknown is the hardest part, right? So we are definitely in that position of trying to figure out what's the next step and having contingency plans in place so that whatever it happens, we can then move that needle quickly.
Yes. We know there's a lot of oil on the track ahead, and we all have to adjust to it. So now we want to start talking about coming out of the turn, because there's all that stuff to deal with in it. And there's this concept of understanding the apex. Basically, the apex is the point of the turn at which the car is closest to the inside of the corner. They also call it the clipping point. You've heard the expression, we clipped the corner kind of a thing. And the picture you see there is a car who misjudged the apex because it's up on two wheels. So once you hit the apex, you can start to loosen up your steering a little bit. You can start to increase the throttle and focusing on the exit. But determining the apex can be tricky in a race and in a pandemic. If only we knew, right? If only you knew when the stock market was going to bottom out and start heading back up. If only you knew when we were going to go back to work and not have to go back into quarantine. If we move too early, we're going to spin out in the infield. If we move too late, we're going to hit the wall. Either way, we're out. I think it's interesting. This is one area where it's very different from the Great Recession, because one of the problems with the Great Recession was an extended period of uncertainty. We lost almost a decade because there was so much uncertainty about what was going to happen and what the government was going to do. And I chronicled this throughout that time, that companies just stored cash. Nobody was willing to invest. And I was saying, if we all just had some certainty, we could all get back to business and it would all be good. I do think that with this, we are going to get to a point of certainty when enough data comes in about the virus and its spread, if you've been following the news, when we know both the numerator and the denominator, we will have some level of certainty. And that certainty might be, hey, we can all go back to work as long as we're careful. Or it might be, we can't. But we can adjust to anything when we get certainty. And so the question is, when is that moment going to come? And can you sense it? We've all driven, we haven't all driven race cars, but we've all driven. And when you go around a curve, when you hit the apex, you actually start to feel it, maybe even before you see it, as your weight starts shifting a little bit. You can feel the centripetal force starting to change. And you can almost feel it before you see it. And I think that might be true in this case as well, that we're going to start sensing things, whether it's in our social media feeds or reading between the lines of stories that we read or what have you. And the better we can understand the apex, the better we can be prepared to hit the throttle coming out of it. And it's a psychological apex as much as anything. Nobody knows, but the more we can pay attention, the more we can be sense it, the better off we'll be. And that will lead us to the end of the turn, which is accelerating out. I was unaware of this, but NASCAR cars don't have a speedometer. They have a tachometer, so you can monitor the RPMs, but no speedometer. And they say that they installed speedometers briefly for a period of time, but drivers actually slowed down because they could see how fast they were going. They're like, oh, I'm going too fast. So they pulled them back out here. The point is, there's a time to pour it on. And if you can hit the gas a split second before the guy behind you, you can pull away. Or if you're in second place, if you can hit the gas a split second early, you can pull into first place. But you can only do that if you have clear plans in place and clear markers for when to implement them. One of the things that I learned when my company came within a whisker of bankruptcy, this is what started our journey 15 years ago, was that it's very difficult to be creative when you're discouraged or scared. And yet, the two just don't go together, this sort of creativity and fear. But that's why we get paid the big bucks, right? That's why we're leaders. You have to be able to compartmentalize. You have to take the long view. You have to look at a turn not for the difficulties it's going to cause, but for the possibilities it's going to open up. And so the questions are things like, what is your staff going to look like on the other side? Is this a time to streamline it or to upgrade it? What is your technology going to look like on the other side? Is now the time to make a changeover, or maybe to invest in something when you can get it cheaper? What is your website going to look like? What's your marketing plan, your office setup, your market positioning, new products and services, whatever? You need to be considering it all and planning for what you do first, second, and third based on markers that you see. I find it interesting that many of us are frustrated with the government at all levels because we're saying we need a plan to go back. We need a plan to reopen the economy. It's based on certain principles, right? Certain levels of the infection and certain hospital capacities means you can open up certain businesses. And we want sort of markers and rules. Well, it's incumbent upon us to make those markers and rules for our companies. When do you hire? When do you go back to aggressive marketing spend? When do you start prospecting again if you're not? When do you do all those things? So now is the time to be planning all this so that you can accelerate out. And of course, you need to prepare for the next turn because one is coming. We had 9/11, 7 years later, we had the Great Recession, and now this. We've got a college debt bubble that's going to burst someday. We've got a national debt. Who knows what we're doing to it, with these fund releases. People are concerned about the Bill of Rights and the rule of law. Fortunately, we have a very stable country, but, there's absolutely no guaranteeing we won't have another virus in 18 months. So one of the blessings, perhaps, of this one is it's revealing our weak spots so that we can prepare better for the next one. But I always tell my staff this, and I think it's an important point, and that's the second law of thermodynamics, the law of entropy, basically states that everything in the universe tends towards disarray. So things are going to fall apart all the time, sometimes slowly, sometimes quickly. But our job is to be gravity in that equation. We hold things together. We hold things together with our calm demeanor. We hold things together with our strategic expertise. We hold things together. And so we know even coming out of a turn, we're going to come out of this one, there will be another one. It might be a ways away. It might be quickly. We do know some turns that are coming up, like 5G. They're already talking about 6G, which is going to be exponentially faster than 5G, which isn't just going to make your movies download quicker. It's going to change the way business is done. The Internet of Things and blockchain and the trend towards automation, which is going to fundamentally affect your business and mine. It is sort of a good time for me to plug in SureCon because I'm going to be there sharing the results of the disruption cycle survey that we did and their implications. And the coronavirus thing is a giant interruption to all of that, but it's just that, an interruption. It doesn't change the fundamental dynamics of the things we're going to talk about. And part of that is trying to get us all ready for that next turn.
right.
And that will lead us to
Steve, one of the things I think about is I think this is creating real focus and clarity for people. You know, there's a lot of waste, I think, that will be eliminated in businesses because we're learning so much about how you can operate, and we also have less tolerance for mediocrity, frankly. And I think that's going to change how people tighten up this next year and start to think differently about what 2021 looks like.
And in that construct, if we're going to be eliminating waste, how much waste are we? I'm serious. How much of our time and the things that we do is not efficient? You know, so it may not just be trimming the fat out, you know, out there. It's trimming the fat within. But ultimately, I believe that this is how you win the race. And I want to give you a quote from a famous ad guy that has always inspired me. He said, "Creativity is the magical ability to capture and hold somebody's attention while you give them some information or a demonstration or an experience that changes the way they feel, the way they think, and what they do." And here's the important part. He says that doesn't change, but the form you're doing it in changes. So we need to be prepared to, as I've said, hold our missions tightly, hold our models loosely. Every turn is different. Every race is different. The fundamentals of driving don't change, but the way you drive in a certain instance or an environment changes all the time. And every track is different, every turn is different, every race is different. But the better we can develop our skills, the more likely we are to win the race. And this is important. This is my last thought. I'll leave it with you, Marit. We don't have to set the track record every time. We just have to beat the other guy, whether it's raining or sunny or whatever. And that's an important thing to remember. We're not going to do this perfectly. None of us are. All we got to do is, we don't have to outrun the bear, right? We have to outrun Harry, if you remember that old joke.
Good. Yeah. Great. Well, thank you, Steve. You know, I think when we think about takeaways, you know, I think the message is clear, is now's the time to prepare for the future. And now is when you win, right? And I appreciate you taking the time to help us think through these things. I know that you brought a lot of examples from other businesses, which I think is important. We keep learning from other industry and not just ourselves, because there's some great opportunities, I think, for everybody out there to serve their communities in an important way. As you mentioned, you know, independent agents are the fabric of their communities, and this is an opportunity to be there. Allow your employees to be part of that process. And you know, one of the things we're working on right now with a couple other state associations is some type of symposium for independent agents to help them with the reentry. And some of your comments today, even from a perspective I never thought about, well, what if there's ideological differences with your staff about how to deal with this and what kind of friction that can occur within your own organization. So I appreciate all your thoughts and your time. And just as a reminder for folks that we do have a Facebook page, Mornings with Marit. So if you want to join the conversation and share some ideas with us, please join us as a guest there, and we'll continue to work on these webinars and send them out and try and be a resource and continue to help you. If you find this helpful, please remember that at the end of the day, you can share this with your clients as well. It doesn't have to just be you. You can actually pass it along. So have a great morning, Steve. We just had the most torrential downpour during this, so I'm hoping the recording all worked right. and have a wonderful day in Albuquerque today.
Thank you very much.